are my friend, but I don't know if you know who I am. When I was there and I saw what you did, I saw it with my own two eyes. So you can wipe off that grin. I know where you've been. It's all been a pack of lies. I can feel it.
01 is in hot.
That's clear. You're cleared high. Go high.
Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, oh no. Well, I remember, don't worry. How could I ever forget? It's the first time, the last time we ever met. But I know the reason why you keep your silence up. No, you don't see me. 'Cause the hurt doesn't show, but the pain still grows. No stranger to you and me. I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, I can feel it in the air tonight. Oh Lord, oh Lord. And I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, I can feel it coming in the air tonight. Oh Lord, and I've been waiting for this moment for all my life. Oh Lord, oh Lord.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining me on today's 1/72 Air Wing video. It's been a little bit of time since I've uploaded my last video, so let's cover some admin details before we get to the fun stuff, which is reviewing this A-10 from HobbyMaster. So first, it's again been some time since I made a video for you folks, and trust me, I haven't forgotten about the channel or your dedicated and very much appreciated patronage. It's just that some things have happened in my personal life, and all of us only get 24 hours in the day to work with. So for most of October, I spent that month preparing and getting ready for a presentation that was given to my employer's executive team, including the CEO. So that understandably took the majority of my time, because as much as I would like this to be otherwise, making reviews of die-cast models is not a fast lane to fame and fortune, so I must do something else for a living, and therefore that takes priority. So that, combined with various other things happening in November, which kept me busy, especially preparing for the holiday season and what that entails, put me in a position where I just didn't have a lot of free time to work with until basically this week, which is around Thanksgiving of November 2023. So now that I have time to make some of these videos, I'm going to be releasing content, so keep an eye out for some upcoming videos. The Warthog here that you see will be the first of many that I have planned before the end of the year, and I do intend on making some other project videos and model reviews in the new year. So with the admin part covered, let's look at the details at hand on this really cool looking, if somewhat flawed, A-10 Warthog. So the Thunderbolt 2 is the airplane's official name, but it's almost very rarely stated, which is actually kind of interesting because usually when airplanes are named, it's a very generic thing. Air Force generals are not very imaginative, as you all might imagine. So therefore, some of the names that are officially chosen for airplanes are pretty corny to extremely boring. You know, F-16 fighting Falcon. I mean, come on, really? I think pretty much all Falcons fight. That's literally what Falcons do. That's how they become predator animals after all. So, you know, lame names for airplanes are kind of a norm, but the Thunderbolt name is kind of an exception to this because originally I kind of dismissed the Thunderbolt 2 names like, oh, okay, they're reusing a name from a World War II airplane, so what? But some of the research that I did on this cast a whole different light on the A-10 Warthog's official name. So the A-10 was named the Thunderbolt 2 in tribute to the P-47 Thunderbolt, which was a World War II fighter bomber close support airplane that was built by Republic Aviation during World War II. And it served in many important functions, the most of which was in close air support for U.S. and Allied troops during the Normandy landing of June 6, 1944, and the events between then and the capitulation of the Third Reich in August of 1945. So the Tactical Air Command 9th Group, which was headed by General Peter Quaesada, used the P-47 Thunderbolts to first halt a German counteroffensive, which was organized to push the Allies off of the French homeland, and it also was extraordinarily helpful in the German counteroffensive in the Battle of the Bulge. You see, based on the printed materials for it, basically the 9th Tactical Air Force saved the Allied beachhead from being pushed completely off the continent because the logistics of staffing and manning and equipping an army thousands of miles away from your own logistics is very difficult. It's one of the reasons why most amphibious landings in a military sense typically fail. And that was almost the destination of the Allied invasion on June 6, 1944, but the 9th Tactical Air Force's flying P-47 Thunderbolts helped destroy the Nazi war machine, helping the Allies win the day. By strafing trains and various logistical movements, the Germans simply couldn't organize and move their troops into a position to help, which enabled the Allies to get some breathing room, build up their logistics, and advance at the pace that they did. So the 9th Tactical Air Forces, again led by General Elwood P. Quaesada, did enormously good work, and they were praised by multiple generals at the conclusion of the land war in Europe as having been instrumental in helping the Allied armies take the day. So it's in tribute to that the A-10 was named the Thunderbolt 2, because this aircraft was designed to serve a similar function in what was expected to be a Soviet Union-NATO land war. A land war which was expected to have several characteristics which are similar to the close air support fights involved in World War II. So the A-10 was created based on the lessons learned from World War II close air support and close air support done in Southeast Asia, as well as interviews with Nazi pilots who fought the Russians during the Soviet Union advance into German territory and whatnot during World War II. So analysis and evaluation of the plan for the A-10 was that we had seen, the U.S. Air Force had seen in Southeast Asia that using the F-4 Phantom and the F-100 Super Sabre found that there were some flaws. Those fast jets are built to fly at a large speed range, which means when they're flying at 300, 400 knots, they require large turn radiuses in order to, turn radii, in order to re-attack a target. And that, combined with their large fuel consumption and relatively large size and somewhat fragile construction, we'll get to that a little bit later, meant that they were capable in a close air support role, but they had some shortcomings. And it was felt that fighting the fielded Soviet armies in a Warsaw Pact NATO confrontation was going to require something that was a dedicated close air support airplane. So after studying the Southeast Asian War and some of the losses on Republic's earlier F-105 Thunder Chiefs, which we'll also return to a little bit later, the A-10 was built to fix those flaws. So it has a manual control system. So if any of the hydraulic systems, the primary and the backup, are damaged or fail, the airplane can still be controlled with manual cables and pulleys, which is a very old school system of control. That's pretty much how the Wright brothers flew their flyer in, the 1908. But suffice it to say that, if the A-10 is hit and it's hit badly enough to lose its hydraulics, the pilot can still take the airplane back. It also has a titanium armor surround of the pilot's area on the aircraft. So if any major rounds like 57 millimeter or 23 millimeter machine gun fire hit this area, the pilot is not going to be hit by shrapnel or hurt or incapacitated, making it, of course, a much more durable aircraft from that perspective. The fuel tanks are integrated into the wing of the aircraft, so that if the engines are hit and there's shrapnel from the moving engine that goes into the fuselage, without any fuel located near the engines, the aircraft is less likely to be damaged from a fire. With the fuel tanks in the wings and armored, once again, the likelihood of there being damage is also minimized. The external, what you see here for the landing gear, it is mounted in such a way that if the airplane has to belly land, it's not going to scrape and cause a fire that could damage the aircraft further. And the location of the potted landing gear also helps with keeping the landing gear out of the wing, which enhances the ability to carry more fuel. And more fuel enables the A-10 to have a very long loiter time. So when you have a combat loaded aircraft, you can have loiter times of 2 hours, 3 hours in some cases, depending on the load and the fuel taken aboard, which of course will be done in the mission planning phase of things. But the reason the long loiter time is important is because if that there is a troops in contact situation, the A-10s can stay there and help the troops, because if they get ambushed, obviously the nature of an ambush is as a surprise, right? So if there is a situation like that, the A-10 has the fuel to stay in the combat zone and provide overhead cover. The bad guys simply can't just take cover and wait the bombardment out. Whereas with something that's got more of a faster speed to it, like an F-4, F-100, F-16, those airplanes don't have the fuel endurance to stay around the troops for long periods of time. So if they are ambushed, and close air support is around to help, the bad guys know that, hey, close air support airplanes that are really fast require a lot of fuel, and that 10 or 15 minutes they're going to have to leave the front and go back and get gas, which means all the bad guys have to do is just take cover and set their watches and wait. So that's not a particularly helpful situation if you are grunt on the ground with a rifle. So the A-10 has a large fuel capacity to help its mission in supporting the troops on the ground. So it has 11 hard points, which just bear in mind that out of the 11 that the airplane has, if you're going to put stations or stores on stations here and here, you don't put a store in the center. Likewise, if you have a store in the center line, the outer stations are not occupied. Note also that the A-10's external fuel tanks, which aren't part of this particular model kit, are the same as what's on the F-111 series of fighter bombers. So if you have an F-111 kit or spare part laying around, you can put an F-111 external tank on the center line, and that will be a completely legitimate way to display your model. But coming back to the A-10's design, this aircraft was built to be very survivable on the Warsaw Pact front line. Further, another thing I'll point out, which you can't see here, but the back of the engines are shrouded. So the front has, of the TF-34 high bypass turbofans, has the compressor. So the engine itself is behind two shields, which means if it's hit in the back with a missile or high velocity anti-aircraft artillery fire and you lose an engine, the airplane is likely to get back on the other, and you have a much reduced possibility of the turbine coming apart and shredding various parts around the airplane and causing a fire and bringing it down. Two tails, so that if one tail is hit, The aircraft is still capable of being controlled and safely flown back to base on the other one. And of course, we have the massive 30 millimeter Gatling gun, which I suspect if you're watching this review, you probably know about as much of it as I do. The full assembly of the 30 millimeter Gatling gun goes from here to the ammunition drum, which is almost the size of the airplane itself in terms of side-to-side diameter. And the cannon goes into the ammunition tray, which can carry 1,150 rounds. Usually it's loaded to about 750, but this is built almost into the entirety of the front of the airplane. That way the recoil control is manageable, the gun can be accurately fired, and more importantly, the idea behind this cannon is if you are in an environment where you're out of missiles, or your missiles can't work because the weather is bad, or there's fog, or the environment just isn't suited to dropping the ordnance, or maybe the airplane has cluster bombs, but the close air support situation requires something more precise, the gun is always there to do damage. And that's the idea behind building the airplane around the cannon. Interesting findings I found out is that one of the ways this airplane defeats tanks, I think some people have the idea that the A-10 kills tanks because it physically blows them up, like a Michael Bay movie. I found out that what's really key about it is the gun was not necessarily designed to destroy tanks. It's designed to disable them. And I think that's an interesting nuance to point out, because a 30 millimeter round is big, it's huge, and it does damage, but it's not going to physically destroy a tank. But what it is going to do is it's going to hit important parts of the tank, which will render it useless for combat action. If a 30 millimeter round hits the track of the tank, the crew inside might not be hurt, but the tank's not going anywhere. And if it can't move, then the tank is, first of all, not capable of fighting because it can't move, so it can't go someplace and hurt your people. Further, it's immobilized, which means the crew now has to call for assistance from another tank or some other vehicle to move it to some area where it can be safely repaired, which generally isn't going to be the front line of the combat zone in question. So now you have one vehicle out of the action, and there may be now another vehicle out of the action that now has to tow the damaged tank out of the fight instead of contributing to the fight itself. And finally, with the cannon, if the cannon rounds go through the engine or the top of the tank, or damage some important part of the tank's functionality, that tank is out of combat, right? And it's basically out of combat almost as much as if it were physically destroyed, because whether the tank is completely destroyed or if the turret is jammed because 30 millimeter rounds have damaged the turret motor so the turret gun can't move, either way the tank isn't combat capable, right? So the idea behind the A-10 and the cannon is it can disable tanks. And by disabling tanks, I mean, yes, if it blows a tank up because it hits something particularly vulnerable, that's great, that's awesome, but that's really not the point. Based on the printed sources, the idea of the cannon is it can knock out the tank and give it the combat equivalent of a flat tire, right? If you have a flat tire, your car is basically a paperweight until that's fixed, right? And it's the same dynamic with a tank. If it's broken, in some way where it can't shoot or it can't move or both, that's basically just as effective from a combat perspective as if you physically destroyed it, right? So something to point out when discussing the A-10, unfortunately there's a lot of controversy in politics around both the origin of the A-10 and its place in the Air Force force structure, which are topics that I was originally going to try to touch on in this video, but yeah, there's way too much going on there. So what I'll probably do is I'll make a dedicated video about the A-10's history and some of the politics around it that kind of hack, take my machete of facts and hack through the forest of BS and spin and nonsense that have been grown around this airplane over the last 50 years that it's been around, since it was initially capable in 1976. So that's a lot of history, and frankly, there's probably 2 videos. I mean, it seriously might be a 2-part deal that I might do on that, because there's just so much material there to really cover. And if I can't leave any of it out and have any of it make sense. So I'll revisit some of the origins of the A-10, why it is so controversial, why it's the target of so much political stuff, and why an airplane that's really done quality work by the data, has still has a controversial reputation even now. So We'll cover that later, but today's review is going to focus on this particular A-10. And just as a summary of some of the things that the A-10's done, 132 A-10s deployed to Operation Desert Storm in 1991, which, while only making up 7% of the 1,800 coalition tactical aircraft deployed, nevertheless, the A-10s contributed to 8,744 sorties. And that's actually an undercount because based on the Gulf War Air Power Survey, the statisticians who prepared that report were careful to note in the margins that approximately 2,000 A-10 sorties were not counted in that 8,744 total. There may actually be more than that, but because the Gulf War A-10s were deployed to forward operating bases, many of those airplanes, when they flew back from missions, they didn't have an official debrief that was recorded by the statistical tracking data of the time, because I suppose that information was carefully controlled at the official bases, not at the small forward operating ones that were far away from the main operations. So many of those sorties apparently didn't make their way into the data collection system, which meant that the 8,744 sorties that they flew were an undercount. That's just the ones that the people who prepared the Gulf War Air Power Survey were able to confirm, which places them only to the F-16, which logged 11,698 sorties. So for 132 airplanes to deliver 8,744 missions plus, that's pretty major. They also knocked down quite a few targets. They took down about 132 Scud missiles, 135 Scud missiles, and 6,839 targets were engaged and destroyed by the A-10. Again, these are underestimates from the Gulf War Air Power Survey, so it's likely the A-10s in fact did more to contribute to the Gulf War Air Power effort. About 40 A-10s were later deployed during Operation Allied Force in 1999. Compared to some of the losses that the coalition aircraft had, no A-10s were lost, and during the operation they conducted multiple missions such as combat search and rescue, close air support, and forward air control work. It's notable that 2 A-10s participated in the rescue of both the F-117 pilot who flew Vega 31 when it was shot down by Serbian Colonel Zoltan Dani. Colonel Zoltan Dani would also go on to shoot down a squadron commander at the 555th who was flying an F-16 when he was hit by Colonel Zoltan Dani's missile. At the time, Squadron Commander Goldfein had been shot down and was subsequently rescued by a search and rescue unit, which included 2 A-10s. That same squadron commander would later, in 20 years' time, become the top general of the U.S. Air Force, namely the Chief of Staff. And it's just interesting to see how maybe that might not have turned out the way it was if the A-10s weren't there to assist in supporting the close air support doing the quote-unquote Sandy mission. A-10s were also sent during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. The Operation Enduring Freedom started in 2001 after 9/11, and Iraqi Freedom happened in March of 2003. And as I make this video now, A-10s are still deployed in the Middle East after recent unrest during the Hamas-Israel war that started quite unfortunately last month in October. The U.S. Air Force has deployed some A-10s to the Middle Eastern area of responsibility, and they're probably doing some yeoman work right now against various elements affiliated with Hamas and Iran and all that, but if I ever do get around to making that video, we'll probably have to wait quite a long time before that stuff ever gets declassified. But suffice it to say, the A-10 is still very much in use, very much relevant today in our world of guided missiles, stealth, drones, and cyber warfare, and so forth. And I suspect an airplane like this will always be needed in the U.S. Air Force inventory, even if sometimes the Air Force generals and the barons of industry might not like that too much. So this particular A-10 is in the colors of the A-10 Demonstration Team out of Davis-Monthan Air Base. So if you're wondering what the DM, flash, and the tail stands for, that's what it is. Davis-Monthan is in Arizona, and they are home to the 357 Fighter Squadron. 3 A-10s are assigned to the demonstration team. One of them is painted in these colors. So A-10 Warthog number 810962 was painted in the Southeast Asian Commemorative color scheme, which was to commemorate the 355th Fighter Wing, which is the parent organization heritage with Southeast Asia. The 355th Fighter Wing now was the same unit as the 355th Tactical Fighter Wing in the 1960s, and that unit deployed to Thailand as part of Operation Rolling Thunder, flying the F-105s. So if you were looking at the intro, wondering why I've got F-105 footage in there, there you go. So the history of this airplane and the color scheme it commemorates is to pay homage to the airmen and the pilots and the crews that worked during that mission and lost so much. There's a lot of names on the side of this airplane that have POWs and killed in action from that conflict. And the 355th had quite a tally as a wing of a lot of officers, both young and old, who were shot down and either killed or captured and taken prisoner until the end of the war in 1974. One of the things that I learned about this when I was researching this video is in the book Bury Me Upside Down by Don Sheppard recalls some of what the families had to deal with when their loved ones were shot down, because the Air Force had a policy where basically people who were shot down, the Air Force always sent a letter automatically as a matter of policy to the families whenever one of the airmen was shot down. And because of the way that paperwork traveled, oftentimes a pilot would get shot down, they'd get rescued, and then the letter would be sent anyway, even though the airman who had been shot down was recovered. And there were instances in that book of people who were told that, you know, their loved one or their husband or their brother or whoever had been shot down in Southeast Asia, and, you know, the family goes into an understandable panic, starts figuring out, hey, you know, what happened to their loved one, or what's the story, and then only to find out that they got rescued and it's okay, but, you know, the Air Force never sends a letter when they rescue somebody. They only sent the letter when someone got shot down. So that aspect was always, that was an interesting thing to see when I was reading the source material. And one pilot from that book had mentioned how he was told when he was recovered from being shot down that he needed to call his family immediately, and the pilot didn't want to do that because he figured, hey, you know, all's well that ends well. He got home safe, and he didn't want to worry his family about, hey, you know, you almost died and almost could have gotten taken prisoner. And his wingman said, hey, you need to call home anyway, because regardless of how the story ends, the Air Force is going to send your family a letter that you got shot down, and you don't want them freaking out any more than they already will, right? So, and that's just a fraction of some of the stuff that happens. I mean, people who've been shot down, you know, they were in jail in some cases for almost a decade. The first pilot you had to get to be a POW was a Navy officer, Lieutenant Junior Grade Alvarez, who was shot down in an A-4 back in 1965. He didn't come home for almost a decade. And picture being in jail for 10 years and then coming to a world that's completely different. The world's moved on, society is different, your family, your friends have all moved on with their lives. You know, any, you know, romantic partners you may have had at the beginning, it's very unlikely they're going to be the same people when you come home. They may have considered you dead and remarried. I mean, it's all very tough waters to navigate emotionally, and that's for the people who had people that were taken prisoner and came home. The ones that were killed in action, oftentimes the Air Force would basically just say, hey, we don't know if your loved one died or not, essentially. And it's a different level of suffering to know that someone you love has died potentially, but you don't really know. And the Air Force isn't necessarily forthcoming with that information. And sometimes it's for good reasons, because you know, there's security concerns involved, and sometimes in some of those instances it's just bureaucracy and people just not wanting to tell the truth about something because some general or some colonel might not look good on a report or something. And you know, that's a lot of emotional strain, and that most people I don't think realize when they see instances of pilots who are killed in action or are taken prisoner. And while the color scheme of this A-10 is not dialed into the way I'd like, and I'll get to that later when we get to the pros and cons of the model, I still think it's important to recognize that the pilots who are shot down and are taken prisoner, even when the war is over, in many ways they still need support, and they still need some guidance in navigating the world when they're back to it. So we fortunately have not had a major conflict like Vietnam where 7 or 8 pilots are getting shot down each week or something crazy. You look at the numbers from Operation Rolling Thunder and it really blows your mind when we have entire wars where we don't lose 10 airplanes. And then you have Ed Rasmus writing about his time in the 355th and how he reported to work in not Korat, I believe it was Uban. Actually, no, maybe it was Korat, but he rotated to Korat, and the previous week, 8 of his wingmen were shot down, and then only 4 of them got rescued. That was his life. That wasn't even like an enormously dangerous time. It was just considered normal that, hey, each week you're going to lose about 7 people or 7 aircraft, and you might lose 4 people each week, and that was just accepted. That was just part of the deal with rotating to a combat zone and having 100 missions. And I think now if that same thing happened again, the congressional hearings would be a hoot. So it's been a while since we've had that scenario, but I think it's important to still keep the memory of the people who were imprisoned and have come back, to keep that in mind. Veterans holidays are not just for free Applebee's, folks. So for that reason and for a few others, I'm glad to have this in the mix, but there are some flaws that we'll cover later again in reviewing the model. So looking on to my favorite part, and I'm sure some of yours too, we're going to talk about the HobbyMaster rendition here, some of the pros and some of the cons, and whether I think it's worth including in your collection. So the one of the pros is they've included a set of empty pylons with the model, which I'm glad to say, I'm glad to see, and I'm glad to share here, because that's one of the things I've asked for before in some of my reviews. Not every military airplane has like fully loaded pylons all the time, right? Sometimes, for various reasons like missions and weight and balance, payload, and so forth, most military airplanes don't fly with fully loaded pylons, right? If you have 11 on an A-10, maybe, maybe 2 or 4 in each wing are occupied, right? Maybe you have an ECM pod and a targeting pod and some, cluster bombs, and then that's pretty much it, right? What you see here is not an A-10 with everything bolted onto it, right? So I do like the fact that HobbyMaster included the unused pylons, just the pylons by themselves with nothing on them, just so that, hey, you can have the airplane in a display configuration where you have some pylons with stuff on, some pylons without, or you can display it with just the naked pylons themselves, just like you would see on maybe a demonstration bird like this one. So I would like to see that on more releases, especially releases of quote-unquote normal military airplanes. So your choices aren't either a naked airplane or one that has an impractical and unrealistically large payload, right? I'm thinking of like the F-14s where they have 6 Phoenix missiles mounted. Yes, that's technically feasible, but realistically the US Navy never flew it that way, and neither did the Iranians. So, why not have a couple of naked pylons on there to help out? You know what I mean? So glad to see that they have the naked empty pylons that are an option for this release. Also, the small details look good. I'm glad to say that the POW MIA inscriptions on the starboard side of the nose are done really clearly. You see that the nose flash here with the crew chief and the pilot are also done really well. You've also got the small markings here for the wing indicators, the stars and bars, some of the tail flashes, and then the stenciling. It's all done really well. I'm also glad to share that they've done the antennas do justice. So you have your IFF aerial communications aerial, some of your avionics antennas in the back, and then the radar warning receiver. Some of that stuff is modeled accurately also. The payloads are also done really well. You've got your Mavericks, you got your 2 AIM-9s on the side here, really accurately rendered launchers there. Got your Sniper XR targeting pod, ALQ-130 ECM pod, which is done to avoid radar missiles from tracking the aircraft. Got your unguided rockets, cluster bombs here, Maverick here. There's also another Maverick option that I have not put on the airplane, but you do get in the box. And the TF34 engines are modeled really well, so the turbine faces are really crisp. You don't see too much in the way of overspray or weird colors. And then the back is also really done as well. The shroud is accurately rendered. So all these things are definitely pros. So, and the other benefit that I'll look at too is the gun is rendered pretty nicely. I would prefer it if this were more of a reflective silver color, but besides that, I think the detail looks pretty nice. I mean, it's 1/72nd scale, so there's only so much you can do with a part of that size, but it is prominent enough to be realistic. So I'm glad to see that HobbyMaster's done that, do justice there. So yeah, I think overall it's a pretty cool looking A-10, and I'm glad to share that, hey, you can still actually get these at pretty reasonable prices because, well, for reasons I'll get to in the cons. So one of the pros that I'll say though is that because of the flaws that I'm going to get to, this A-10 is pretty attainable. They're still in stock, and you can still get them for about $100 US, give or take, plus shipping. So it's nice to see that, because the A-10s aren't built pretty frequently by HobbyMaster. So sometimes you get periods where they go up in value pretty astonishingly. The A-10 that I did a review on a couple of years ago has gone up enormously in value. I did not realize just how much these things can go for until I did some research before this video. So this one, however, should still remain relatively attainable for reasons that I'll get to in the cons, which is what we'll start with here. So the pylons are pretty tough to fit. That's the first con I'll mention. My example, I basically needed to sand down a few of the pylons to get them to fit into the slots correctly. Even the pylon here you see with the ECM pod, the LQ130, you see that there's the little post is still visible. That's because that's one that I didn't get around to sanding before starting this video, but the tolerances for this one are pretty much caliber wings in terms of wonkiness. So much as when you get a caliber wings model, you basically have to break out your files pretty much anytime you want to install parts on it. That's going to be the dynamic, at least with this one. Hopefully the one you get, if you do decide to add this to your collection, that's just a one-off thing with mine, and yours fits just fine. But I can say that mine, I had to do some sanding to get those pylons to fit. Another flaw is the canopy doesn't have a lot of resistance if you put it in the canopy open position. If you display your A-10s with the canopies open, bear in mind that you might need some blue tack or something to hold it up, because the resistance is fairly weak out of the box. So it may not be a concern if you display it in flight or with the canopy closed, but just understand that up front. The POW MIA script is clear, and it's not crooked or really messy or anything, which is good, but it is too far back on the nose. I would prefer it if it were a little bit closer to the nose, just like the actual article. And we'll finally get to what you've probably already noticed, and it's that the teal green here. So the Southeast Asian color scheme is composed of a light green, which is this color here, the dark green, which we'll get to in a moment, and the tan, which is this here. Unfortunately, what HobbyMaster did here is they painted it teal instead of dark green. So this doesn't look like a Southeast Asian airplane. It looks like, well, it looks like something else. And if you have it by itself on display, it's probably not a big deal. But if you display this next to an F-105 or anything with the actual Southeast Asian color scheme, it's going to be painfully obvious that the color scheme is quote unquote wrong. Obviously, there's some variation with color schemes, and especially deployed airplanes, because stuff gets worn, and maintenance in the field is mostly focused on making the airplane fly, fight, and win, not necessarily on whether it looks pretty. But in this case, I'm not sure that this is something that you can fix out of the box. Maybe with some weathering of certain parts, you can maybe obscure it a bit, but again, it's a demo bird, so it is kept a lot cleaner than most A-10s would. And it does detract a bit, especially if you display this next to another Southeast Asian color scheme model, which is unfortunate, because I think if they had rendered the dark green correctly, it would have looked amazing. The dark green color is more something akin in shade to what you see here on the cluster bomb. It's more of that shade, not this cyan business. And the lighter the environment that you display it in, the more obvious it's cyan blue. And yeah, I wish that would have been something different. So what I may do for a future project with this is weather the A-10, take the gun muzzle, paint that a little bit more of a consistently, more of a titanium color, and then I might do something about the cyan on the areas where I can just paint it and not have to worry too much. Some of the areas around the wing sashes and some of the nose detail, I don't know if I can really do anything about that without having to strip off the paint and re-tampo it. And I'm not sure that there's, I haven't even looked, but I'm not sure that there's a decal kit that'll fit this. So, we'll see. We'll see what I do. But I'll probably do some weathering at the very minimum, and I might paint it the proper shade of dark green on some other parts of it. Again, the nose and the areas where you have some stenciling, I'm probably not going to be able to do much with, but even if it's just a little bit, if I have some dark green on it, I think it'll look a lot better than what we see here. So stay tuned for that video. When I get around to that project, I will shoot a conclusion video and get that out to you guys. I was originally going to make a project video showing how I did it along the way, but putting a camera in front of you while you're painting a model, yeah, it's a lot tougher than it sounds, folks. So maybe someone else out there can pull that off, but I'm not that talented. So all things considered, there are some issues with this model. The pylon fit is a point to note, and the color is wrong. So there are some issues here, but if you are somebody who wants to commemorate the 355th Tactical Fighter Wings time in Southeast Asia, and you're a fan of the A-10 and you like demonstration birds, or any of those things apply to you, it's still probably worthwhile to get it in your collection. I wouldn't overpay to buy it, but it is uniquely colored, and I mean, yeah, it is cyan, but it still looks pretty good. It's an A-10, and for the money, it's not, hugely expensive to get. So of all the A-10s that are specially colored, this one's probably the most reasonable to get because it is the wrong color with the dark green and all. So yeah, so I think it's a worthwhile addition, even though there are some flaws at work. And hopefully those of you out there watching this might find some value in some of the ideas shared here. And I will make another video on the A-10's history, kind of cover that in more detail, because the breadth and depth of that really does exceed a model review here. So thank you for watching. If you watched to this point, I'll extend my appreciation for this video. And if it's the first time you've visited my channel, I want to say welcome. And I would invite you to click the like and subscribe. That way, me and YouTube know that you like this video. And further, if you subscribe, you will be notified when I upload a new video. So it's a win-win all the way around, I think. And that way, once again, you'll be notified when I have new content to share. So you'll see more of this once I get this airplane in the paint booth and we can correct some of the more obvious deficiencies with the color scheme and put some weathering on here and all that. So more to come on this A-10 and its looks to it. So once again, I'll extend my thanks to everyone who's watching the video, and feel free to check out my other model reviews. All the models that I review are of my own personal collection. I do not resell them. I am not a retailer or a professional dealer. So the opinions and reflections I have are of somebody who has paid his own money for a model. I'm not sponsored or picked up by any vendor or biased in that respect. So just know that when you're watching my content, because of course in social media, not everyone that has something to say is saying it from an unbiased or financially influenced position, if you understand my point. Once again, I'll say it for a third time, but I'm still very much grateful for all of you who have subscribed and watched my videos, and I will be publishing more content in the coming weeks. Thanks for watching.